Welcome back everyone. So in this lecture we are going to focus on how we can get information from the IP address. So if you want to know a public IP address, you cannot do it easily on your local network, so you have to somehow send a request outside of your network and then get back the results. So this is one of the most easiest way of finding the public IP address. So in addition to finding public IP address, what the program we are going to develop will help us to track the location of the IP address, where it is located, what is the time zone, etc. So these kind of things. So in order to achieve this, what we will do is we will create a GET request to an API called IP API. So this is a free API and this is their website. So what they do is that they provide an API or application programming interface for IP addresses. And so you create a request to this API and the API give back the response containing the required results. And you will see what I mean by the result. So the result will contain the location, ISP, etc. Let's create so I have created a project and then I have a virtual environment here. So we need to install a module called request to proper work with this, because the request module will help us to create requests to this API. So in order to install it, I can simply say pip install requests, and this will install this package. So now it has successfully installed this package. So now we can import it in our project and work with it. So let's start importing it. So I am going to call import request, and then we are also going to import the argument parse and another module called JSON. Because the API is going to give back the results in JSON format, and then we are going to parse this JSON file to get or to view the results. So what we will try to do in this lecture is we will create command line application which will require the argument as a command line options. Okay, so first we will parse the arguments and then we will create a request to this API. The API will give back the results and then we can simply print the results. I am going to create if underscore name equals to main, and then we will create an argument parser which will help us in parsing our arguments. So I am going to create a parser object which would be parse.argument parser, and then we will simply add an option which will include an IP address. So parser.add argument, and the first argument would be the label, which would be -i or --IP address, and then we are going to print a help message if there is some problem with it, or specify what this argument represents. So IP address to track, and then we are simply going to parse this argument. So parse arguments, and this will give the arguments back into this variable which is called argument. So we are interested in this IP address, so I'm going to create a new variable called IP, and then I'm going to use this arguments dot IP address. So now this is going to store the value in this variable called IP. So the next thing is we need to create a request to this API. So for that we need a URL. So in order to create a URL, we can say URL is equal to http / and then the name of the website is IP API. So I'm going to write ip-api.com, and then we want the results back in JSON format. So I'm going to give the format here, and the last thing we need to append is the IP address. So IP, and it will look something like this. For example, http IP API -JSON IP address, which would be, let's say, 192.168.0.1. so this is a local IP, but in our case it would be the public IP, so it would not be the same. Okay, so now we have to make a request using the request module. So we can simply, if you want to create a GET request, you can simply use the request.get method, and this will create a get request, and then we have to provide the URL as the argument. So, and it will give back the response, so I'm going to store it in a variable called response, and then we can pass this response as a JSON. So since we already have imported the JSON, we can simply call it here. So I'm going to call it as json.load s, and then I can give the response here, and this will convert it into a JSON format, and I'm going to call it as data, and then we can simply print the data. So let's create a request. So I'm going to call Python, and then I'm going to start this function called tracker.py, and the argument -i, and let's say we want to track google.com. So I will write www.google.com tracker.py. Why is there no file? It's tracker.py, not tracker.py. So I can use the file as Python, and then name of the file tracker.py. So it should be tracker, but I misspelled it, so it's tracker. And then I can give the IP, which would be, let's say, google.com. Okay, so it says the type error, JSON object must be string or byte array, not response. Okay, so this is a response object. So in order to get the content, we can simply call it .content here, and now it will give the content into this data. So I made a small mistake here. If I run this again, you can now see that we get a response back which contains the status, the country where this google.com is located, and all the different elements, for example region, the public IP address, which is this one, the location, which is the latitude and longitude, etc. So now we can print it neatly and see the actual values. So I'm just going to copy, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time here. So instead of values, it should be data. And then I'm going to remove this. Okay, so let's run this again. Now you can see that we have the complete information. So we have an IP address, the city it's located, the ISP provider, etc, etc, and the location as well. So in this way you can track any IP. You just have to provide the IP address here. So you can give your own IP here. I'm not going to give it, but you can give it your public IP here, and it will give you your exact location where you're located right now. So in this way you can track the IP addresses. So that's it for this lecture. See you in next one.